Thank you for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Today we check in with Tom Lukiwski. He is a member of Parliament representing the Saskatchewan riding of Moose Jaw-Lake Centre-Lanigan. Tom, in his farewell to Parliament before he decided to retire, decried the deficit situation involving the federal government as something out of a sci-fi movie. We're going to discuss with Tom his views on these important political issues before he rides off into the sunset. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Tony, it's great to see you again. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's my honor to have you on my program. First of all, maybe a bit of a personal question, but this is probably the first election you haven't contested since, I believe, 2004. So how does that feel?
Weird. To tell you the truth, very weird. You're right. It's been a long time, 6 election campaigns over 17 years. And to be on the sidelines for this one, it's a strange feeling. It's a very strange feeling. I've got mixed emotions, but that's something that Tony, I've come to grips with. I've understood for a while now that it's probably better for me to step down and let somebody younger take the reins. I'm approaching my 70th birthday, and 17 years is a pretty good shift. So I think it's time.
Well, I certainly wish you well. And obviously, being in Parliament takes its toll on everyone, including yourself and myself and many, many others. So it's good for you for deciding to make it a bookend at 17 years there. I want to ask, obviously, we're in the throes of an election campaign. So I think we should start the discussion by talking about what it looks like politically in the province of Saskatchewan. Obviously, you know that province very well and probably have a good sense of how things are going there.
Well, as you know, back in 2019, the last election, we won 14 out of 14 seats, which I believe was the first time in several decades, perhaps ever. I'm a little foggy on the history of the political process or political parties in Saskatchewan, but we were completely successful, a clean sweep, as it were. This time around, I'm quite confident that we're going to retain 14 seats, although, as always, there's going to be challenges. But normally the challenges in Saskatchewan come from the NDP, not the Liberals. Right. I believe the Liberals are a spent force in this province. And if there are going to be any upsets, it will probably come at the hands of the NDP. But I'm confident if I had to wager a small amount of money, I'd certainly be wagering that we'll retain all 14 seats here in the province.
And what are the big issues in Saskatchewan?
Well, number one, it's like everywhere in Canada, it's the debt, Tony, and you identified this at the outset. We are in an incredibly tenuous situation, a very, very difficult situation as a country. I recall during the last federal election in 2019, during some debates and town hall meetings I'd said, God forbid if a recession ever washes up on our shore, I should say, because then we'll be in real trouble. I said that at the time when the Liberals were in deficit to the tune of about $20 billion a year, not thinking for a moment that something like the pandemic would come across our shores and raise that exponentially. Right. Now we have an annual deficit, as you know, well over $350 billion annually, and our accumulated debt is over $1.4 trillion. I think that's getting to a point where it's almost unsustainable, Tony. And that's why I fear not for myself or even my children, but it's my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are going to have to pay the bills. And eventually the bills will have to be paid. It's no more complicated, Tony, than having and running a household budget. If you are spending more money than you've got coming in, eventually that's just a house of cards and something's got to give. So I fear for the economic future of our country. And certainly in Saskatchewan, that's a similar fear that most of the people I speak with have.
So they've confirmed that to you in your conversations?
Absolutely. I mean, there's two things going on here. One is an absolute visceral dislike, and I'll choose my words carefully, of the current prime minister. It's a little stronger than just dislike, but that is one of the greatest motivators to get people out to vote.
Right.
They do not want to see this government and this prime minister particularly reelected.
We're going to take a brief break. We do have to take a commercial break, so hold that thought, and we'll be right back with Tom Lukiwski after this break. Stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Member of Parliament Tom Lukiwski. He is the MP for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre-Lanigan. Tom, I had to cut you off there for a commercial break. Please continue with your thought.
Well, by cutting me off, Tony, you hurt my only feeling. But we'll try and continue. My train of thought there was simply to point out that in Saskatchewan, there is a great deal of dislike for the current Prime Minister and the current government. And that's what's motivating a lot of people to get out and vote. And that's why I think you saw a clean sweep of 14 Conservative MPs get elected in the last election. However, on an economic front, it is number one by a long shot, the fiscal situation in this country, which is concerning most people that I speak with. They know that we are in a situation that is basically unsustainable, and they see no evidence whatsoever that this government has the ability nor the inclination to try and get the finances of this country under control. There's no plan to get back to balance. They've never had a plan to get back to balance, even when the deficits were only in the $10 to $20 billion range. So, Tony, this is something that should be of concern, not just to people in Saskatchewan, but to Canadians right across the country.
You know, Tom, and you raise a very good point, obviously. But it's a surprising point. And I say that because for the last couple of election cycles, getting Canadians to take the debt trap seriously has been almost a losing battle, so it was, in 2015, Stephen Harper campaigned on a balanced budget. The leader of the opposition, Tom Mulcair, campaigned on a balanced budget. And Justin Trudeau campaigned on a deficit budget, and he won the campaign. And since that time, it's been very difficult to get people focused on the hidden costs of deficits. But you think that's turning around a little bit?
Slowly. It certainly is an issue here in Saskatchewan, and I think in most of Western Canada, Canadians are starting to understand that we cannot continue down the road of massive deficits. Because eventually, as I said earlier, Tony, somebody's going to have to pay those bills. And we're going to see increased pressure on Canadians and on household budgets because interest rates have to rise invariably. The Prime Minister has been able to basically do a pretty good sales job for the last number of years, saying, look, because the interest rates are at historic lows, we are able to borrow and make, as he puts it, massive investments. But eventually those interest rates will have to rise. Inflation will set in. And then we're in a heap of trouble because we will be in a situation where our debt is the largest it's ever been in history. And there's no plan to control the debt or the deficits going forward. So while we're able to get by now because of the low interest rates, that will not last forever. And that's what concerns me greatly.
This is, I don't want to put you on the spot, but how do you get out of a hole that's that large? How do you do that?
Well, it's fiscal restraint, pure and simple. It's got to be done. There's going to have to be some difficult choices made. There's going to be pain. Make no mistake, there will be pain for taxpayers and individuals right across the country. I hearken back to the days, and this is showing my age perhaps a little bit, Tony, but I know you can remember as well, the days when Ralph Klein first took over as Premier of Alberta.
Right.
He inherited at that time a massive provincial debt, and he just flat out said, we are going to get this debt under control. And he did. But for the first few years, it was painful.
Right.
It was very painful. But he finally wrestled the debt down. Once he got the budget back into balance and eradicated the debt, Alberta took off in a prosperity train that we've never seen before. And that's, I think, what we have to do here. But there's no plan that I've seen from this government. I think all Canadians really want to see right now knowing that we have this debt primarily caused by the pandemic, at least in the last 18 months, they need to see a plan presented by the federal government how we will get back to balance. There has been no such plan presented whatsoever. And that's what's really of concern. It appears that this government doesn't have a plan and is not working on a plan to get back to balance, because we've seen no evidence of that.
It truly is a concern, and I do want to ask you about Aaron O'Toole's plans in particular, because he's got a large 160-page document to talk about some of these issues. We're going to do it right after the break, though. We are going to take a brief break, and we'll be back with our guest, Tom Lukiwski. Please stay with us. Tom, obviously, you spent a little bit of time on the guys that dug the hole, guys and gals in the Liberal Party who are now running for re-election. And I do want you to comment on Aaron O'Toole's policy document, feel free to do so. I will note that he has proposed a plan to get back to balance, but it's a 10-year plan now.
Correct.
And so maybe comment on that a little bit.
Well, you're right. Aaron and our party released an election platform on day 2 of this campaign called Securing Canada's Future, and it's a 5-point plan. The first one is getting back to balance, getting the finance of this country under control. And you quite correctly pointed out that Aaron is suggesting that we can balance the budget, but it would take a decade to do so. And that's not unreasonable given the large debt that we have accumulated in this country right now. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a responsible approach, and it's one that is necessary. As I was speaking with you about in the last segment, Tony, I am very afraid for the future of this country if we don't do something, don't come up with a plan to get our spiraling debt costs and deficits under control. Aaron says he does have a plan. I've examined the platform carefully. I think it's a credible plan, and it's one that will create jobs and get our country back working as well. So it's something that I hope every Canadian has an opportunity to closely examine. This is the first time, and I'll just speak now from a strictly partisan standpoint. It's the first time, Tony, that I've seen in my career as a politician, spanning 17 years and 6 campaigns, that any political party has released a comprehensive platform as large as the one that we have and launched it this early into the campaign, day 2 of the campaign. I think politically, it might have been a bit of a gamble, but I think it was a right choice to make. We need Canadians to start focusing on what Canada needs to do to get back to a place where we have relatively stable budgets on a yearly basis, where we have our debt and deficits under control. And Aaron, by presenting this 5-point plan, I think is starting to cut through all of the fog and the political rhetoric and getting to have Canadians start to take a close look at what Conservatives would do if elected. And obviously that's the bottom line. Every political party is looking to form government and to come up with a plan for the future of the country. Aaron and the Conservative Party and their plan, our plan, I should say, is no different.
Yeah, no, you raise a good point. I can't think of an instance of a major federal party releasing the plan that early. I remember being in provincial politics in the province of Ontario. Mike Harris released his so-called common sense revolution a year before the election date. And the biggest thing that he was worried about was that the Liberals would copy the plan because it was out so early. And he was very happy when the Liberals denounced the plan because then he knew they couldn't go there. Interestingly, the reason I raised that point is because on the housing affordability issue, Aaron O'Toole has a big plan on various facets of it, on helping the CMHC and helping through infrastructure and so on. But one of the central aspects of it was freezing out foreign buyers who are merely buying homes as investments and therefore allowing more of that housing stock to be available to Canadians. I noticed this week that Justin Trudeau has basically carbon copied that plan and made it part of the Liberal plan. So that's the one thing about releasing a plan early. The Liberals can copy it, but I guess that's the sincerest form of flattery.
Well, I guess it is. I agree with you on that, but I should also point out, Tony, that the Liberal housing strategy is not new. This is something that they announced back before the last election. Actually, in 2015, they came up with the housing strategy per se. And it's been 6 years and they've done nothing to satisfy all of the promises that they made. And I find this is a typical Liberal approach to elections. They'll promise the world, they just won't act on any of their promises. They won't fulfill any of their promises. I recall going back, I think it was in 2006. I was door knocking and I came to one household where a young woman answered the door with, and I could see a couple of youngsters in the background playing in the living room. And she said, Tom, I'd love to give you my vote. I'd love to vote for you, except I can't because the Liberals are promising a national daycare program. And I've got to vote for them because of that. I pointed out to her, of course, this was the 5th election in a row that they had promised for a national daycare program.
We still don't
never delivered.
And welcome back to Boom Bust. I'm your host, as always, Tony Clement, having a nice chat with Tom Lukiwski, Member of Parliament for Moose Jaw-Lake Centre-Lanigan. Tom, I wanted to ask you just about, you're obviously from one of the prairie provinces, and this feeling in Saskatchewan, shared by Albertans and British Columbians, maybe a slightly different way, about, the need for a better deal from the federal government. Tell us a little bit about that feeling of alienation that's going on right now.
Well, you're right. You've pinpointed something that is very, very real in both in Saskatchewan and Alberta, Tony. This feeling of complete alienation of the West, primarily because of the oil and gas sector. Now we feel that the federal Liberals have ignored the concerns and they're putting oil and gas, the entire sector, at risk. And that's why we've seen the upstarts like the PPCs and the Maverick parties start to come forward because of the alienation that they feel. They've been disappointed, quite frankly. Those in the Maverick Party feel disappointed that the Conservatives haven't been able to represent them as well as they would like. They feel that to gain power, the Conservatives or any political party would have to pander to the political voices in Quebec and Ontario primarily. And that's what's driving this feeling of alienation. So, and I think you and I both know our friend Jay Hill very well.
Sure.
Who's the interim leader of the Maverick Party. But if it wasn't for the fact that the federal government has been doing everything it appears in their power to alienate, to punish the West, and that's the impression we get out here, these upstart parties wouldn't have had a route whatsoever to get a foothold into the political process. And I point to things like Bill C-48, the tanker ban. I look at things like the Liberals refusing to do anything to try and improve a national pipeline infrastructure, Energy East, because of the Liberals moving the goalpost and setting the environmental standards so high. TransCanada had to pull out of that project. Justin Trudeau arbitrarily killed Northern Gateway, which was a pipeline that had been approved under our government and would have been pumping oil today if it had not been for the Liberals. So they have not been friends to the West, and their actions have been such that people in the West are absolutely furious at them, and they feel that they've left out. They feel that they have no voice. So that's why the Maverick Party, the PPC, and others have taken root in Western Canada. I lay the blame solely at the feet of the federal Liberals and primarily Justin Trudeau.
So is it as simple as, and we've got about a minute and a half left here, but is it as simple as electing a new government, a Conservative government, to address some of those issues?
Well, that certainly would be a great start, in my view, but nothing's ever simple. Look, at governing a national or governing a country as large and diverse as Canada is never going to be an easy job, regardless of who's in power. I understand that, I get that, but there has to be a concerted effort by those in the ivory towers of Ottawa to understand the concerns of Western Canadians. We have not seen any indication whatsoever that Justin Trudeau understands the basic needs and the basic aspirations of us here in the West. And that's what's more than anything driving this feeling of these feelings of discontent and alienation. Until we get someone in Ottawa that truly shows and demonstrates that they understand the needs and the concerns of us here in the West, nothing's going to change in terms of voting patterns. Certainly not this election, in my opinion.
We got about 20 seconds left. Any predictions?
Well, it's going to be, elections are always fun to watch from the sidelines. I'm doing that now, as I told you, for the first time. I never make a prediction because normally my predictions are absolutely wrong. I will say this, though. I think that Aaron and the Conservative Party had a very strong first week. And I think if that momentum continues, there could be a lot of surprises on election night, September 20th.
Tom Lukiwski, it's been just a joy to have you on my program. Thank you for joining us, and I wish you nothing but success in your post-political life.
Tony, thank you. It's good to see you again, my friend. I hope we get the chance to do this again.
You betcha. Well, there's certainly a view from Western Canada, from the province of Saskatchewan, from Tom Lukiwski, talking about the federal election, some of the issues, Western alienation, the debt trap that the country is in, all very interesting from a retiring member of parliament. We certainly wish him well. Thanks for watching today.